Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul, and in this RedGamingTech.com video, we're going to be discussing as well as analysing tech news, which as usual, has popped up in the past 24 or so hours. Hope you're all having an amazing day. I suspect many of you are anticipating AMD's Financial Analyst Day conference, which is, of the time of my recording, going to start in just a few hours' time, and will be wrapping up very early AM my time. But despite the fact that we are expecting a plethora of announcements at this conference, indeed I've actually been holding off the release of several videos just because, quite frankly, we don't know what information is going to be revealed. There's reports from everything from Microsoft as well as Sony having a presence at the conference, all the way down to AMD revealing an awful lot about their next generation GPUs. The good news is that there are stories floating around the internet anyway, so in the meantime, we can check some of those out. The first of which concerns AMD's driver woes. I actually put out a couple of recent polls, both on Twitter as well as the YouTube community tab, so I'd like to thank everyone who voted in those polls. And well, it really comes down to the issues that people have had, especially with the Navi/RDNA GPUs and their driver issues. Now, I personally could not replicate the issues that you guys have been experiencing, and I've done a lot of stuff. I tried Polaris GPU, I tried RDNA GPU, I tried it with multiple monitors and enabling and disabling HDR, and yeah, I tried different things, and I just could not replicate the problem, and this is over several different systems, including an older Intel one, which is Haswell based. I tried it on a 9900K, and also tried it on a Ryzen 7 system, and I just could not replicate the issues. But obviously, a lot of you guys have been experiencing problems, and AMD have finally decided to do something about it, and they released the 20.2.2 driver. The good news is that we also have a community update. You spoke, we listened, says AMD. The AMD and Radeon communities include some of the most vocal people on the internet. You proudly show off your AMD hardware and rave about how great your system is, but also quickly point out issues you've come across with equal passion. Our team pays close attention to all your posts, and we've worked diligently with our engineers to resolve many of these issues as possible with the latest Radeon Software Adrenalin 2020 edition. Seriously, you can't make the driver name longer. I think it needs to be at least 5 to 6 words longer than that. So there's around 40 major fixes that have been included. Most of those, really, that are important come down to the black screen issues, and these could be for a plethora of different reasons, including things like toggling HDR, because that's a major problem. Running Chrome as well could cause, running Chrome in the background when you're running games, that could cause issues, and so on and so on. I am actually really happy that AMD have released these drivers, and according to the community poll, it seems to be working for an awful lot of you. I do think that AMD still have some work to do with their drivers, and honestly, the situation was kind of a reverse 3-ish years ago, maybe 4 years ago. I'd have to check the archives of my brain for that one, but I remember that NVIDIA have had some very screwy drivers as well, which have caused some let's say problems, but now the shoe is definitely on the other foot. Kind of weirdly, Polaris for quite some time was super duper stable, and NVIDIA were the ones that were just having major problems with their drivers. But recently, especially since RDNA launched, they've definitely been taking a hammering in the press, and obviously with the Financial Analyst Day and the upcoming launch of the next generation Radeon GPUs, they can't afford that negativity. The good news is, though, that at least for AMD, their market share is doing pretty well, but according to a lot of people that I've been interacting with on Twitter and just posts on the community and just even a couple of emails, yeah, some people have been returning their cards. There was a couple of people I've been chatting with, and they bought, like, let's say the 5700 XT, and they just were experiencing blank screen. And it's really frustrating for me as a reviewer, because it's like, well, I kind of recommended the product and I had no issues with it, and then it's like, doink, blank screen. And then you kind of tell them, hey, did you try running like DDU, and are you running multiple monitors and the normal things, and they're like, yup, done, yup, not overclocking, and then you're kind of like, pass, and then when they say something like, well, we've even tried reinstalling Windows, you're kind of left scratching your head. That's one of the reasons in my recent RX 5500 review that I did say at the end that while I've not personally had issues with the Radeon drivers, despite trying to get them to have issues, I was just, kind of telling you all to be mindful of that. So I'm really happy that that's changing. I really want to be able to recommend AMD as well as Nvidia, and I personally want it just to be a matter of, well, quite honestly, what is the best product at a specific price, rather than also needing to take stability of drivers into the equation. But I think that's just about it on that particular topic. Let's move over to something a bit different. Now we're going to move over to a very interesting discovery in AI/deep learning. And I'd like to introduce you to Slide. And no, this is not some dance floor move. Instead, Slide is a new algorithm for deep learning training. Basically, when it comes to training, it's way harder to train AI than what it is to then run that. So training and inference. I actually discussed this quite a bit in an interview. I believe it was with Neil Trevitt. I discussed this quite in depth. So you can search deep learning on the channel, or Neil Trevitt deep learning or something like that, and it should pop up. I'll also try to remember to link it in the video description if I'm not a chimp. Anyway, so this particular paper is really interesting. Basically what we have here is normally GPUs, particularly Volta-based GPUs, which are obviously designed for the data center, they typically really outperform a CPU simply because of the highly parallel nature of the workload. So what this team of researchers has basically discovered is this new algorithm actually performs extremely well on CPUs. So in the research paper, they're using Xeon CPUs. I'll discuss more about the configuration in just a moment. But from what I've gathered through the research paper, it's not Intel specific, so this technically could run on an AMD CPU. What they've also done is disable hyperthreading as well. I will link the paper in the description of this video. I'll be going over it kind of brief here because it's quite a lengthy paper. But basically all of the experiments were conducted on two 22-core processors. So I want to emphasize here, there are two processors in the machine. They are Intel Xeon E5 2699A V4s, which are running at 2.4 GHz. Once again, I'd like to commend Intel for an extremely memorable name. And those processors have 22 cores each. So that's 44 threads typically, but in this particular instance, they've disabled hyperthreading. So because of that, throughout the paper, they state that cores and threads are basically the same because obviously normally if you have a hyperthread core, that would be 2 threads per core, but if you disable it, well, it's only 1 thread, so thread and core count is identical in that instance. And they also have the machine with an NVIDIA Tesla V100, which is a Volta-based GPU, equipped with 32 gigabytes of memory. So I'm going to read this part verbatim, as I feel that the researchers can probably explain this in a more concise and accurate manner than I can. We have in the lab, in our test case, we have a workload that's perfect for the V100. One with more than 100 million parameters in a large, fully connected network that fits in the GPU memory. We train this with the best software package out there, Google's TensorFlow, and it took 3.5 hours to train. We then showed this new algorithm to see what it can do on the CPU, and apparently it took an hour. So without using the GPU on the 44-core Xeon class CPU, it took an hour. Just to reiterate, 44 core, they're basically saying that the two processors are together, which are 22 core each. 22 times 2 obviously is 44, so they're just basically in that way amalgamating the core count. So that's actually really cool, and it'll be very fascinating to see how the researchers kind of conduct with this. Honestly, while I have an interest in deep learning, it's not one of my stronger areas. I'd like to interview a few people actually concerning deep learning and neural networks, because I think the subject itself is fascinating. So if you do work in this field, definitely contact me, Paul at Red Gaming Tech, and yeah, we'll maybe set up an interview or something. And the final piece of news for today, according to Dealer Gaming, who is a fellow YouTuber, though I'm looking at this from Twitter, he believes that Microsoft will be sharing Lockhart details for the first time soon, although he didn't state when soon is. Knowing my luck, it will be at AMD's Financial Analyst Day conference. But apparently they will be giving insight into Xbox's multi-SKU approach for the next generation. Apparently this system is going to be a 4 T-flop based device, and it's also going to sport a Zen 2 processor. Apparently, he believes it's going to be around the $300 mark, which I kind of believe it is as well. I know some people are expecting it to be like $250-ish, but it's not going to be cheap to produce this, even if you say that the GPU is only 4 T-flops, which probably means they're going to drastically cut down the number of compute units. But there's still 12 gigabytes of memory, a Zen 2 based CPU in there, and the price of a reasonably sized SSD, we can assume it's going to be a terabyte in there, is not particularly cheap. So I still think that the build cost for this is going to be kind of high. There's probably not going to be much difference, honestly, in the clock frequency for the CPU. Maybe a couple of hundred megahertz is what I'm hearing. From what I've heard, Microsoft are targeting 3500 megahertz for their CPU, which is for the Xbox Series X, which is around 300 megahertz faster than the PlayStation 5 from the leaks we saw. Personally speaking, though, I don't believe the clock frequency has been finalized from either system yet, or I guess either 3 systems, given we should be seeing something about Lockhart soon. But I personally believe that the CPU speed for the PlayStation could also change. Don't forget that happened last generation. There was a last-minute bump with Microsoft. They kind of cranked up the clock frequency, and I also think that's probably why they are kind of dealing with things how they are. I suspect that Microsoft are preparing for the fact that if Sony can release a more powerful GPU for their system, they can be like, oh, okay, well, we're going to crank the clock frequency of our GPU up. It'll take around 1800 megahertz for them to reach the next milestone, which will be 13 T-flops. And currently they're running at around 1675 to hit 12 T-flops. I say around because obviously this has not been confirmed for A, and based on internal testing it was 1675, but for all we know they are now running at, let's say, 1700 megahertz. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what exactly happens with the differences between the consoles. We all know that Microsoft have been running some really aggressive deals with the Xbox One X, which does have a more powerful GPU in theory, but the thing of it is, this GPU is going to be based on RDNA 2, so the efficiency gains are going to be kind of crazy. I've also finished an article which does go into the whole T-flop situation, as a number of people have asked me my opinion and how it's going to compare against the PC. I've basically written the script, but given the Financial Analyst Day is going to be today, and I finished the script yesterday, I decided to hold off, just because I was curious what final details are going to be announced for the RDNA 2 architecture. I'd like to be able to include those in the script, just so it's as up-to-date as possible. I'm hearing, and once again this is potentially going to be really out of date in just a couple of hours, but I'm hearing that there are some substantial improvements for the second generation of RDNA. And I do know some products that are coming up with the second generation, but I'm going to kind of remain silent on that for now until the Financial Analyst Day, because I'm very curious to see what they actually report. There's also been a lot of times I've been tagged in the PlayStation 5 and the RDNA generation on that, and I know a lot of you want me to make a video on it. I'm going to wait until the financial analyst day is done, because once again, I would really like to have as many official details as possible before I go into that. What I will say, and yeah, all I'll say on that for now is that when it comes to GPU generations, they mean an awful lot less for console than what they do desktop, because when it comes to consoles, you generally speaking have an awful lot more customization in there. But I think that's just about it for this particular video. Oh, and one last thing, Ghost of Tsushima has finally been announced. We actually have a release date for it, he says, as he's actually forgotten the exact date. Yes, June 26th. So, not that long actually into the future. And there is, of course, multiple different versions of it because, of course, modern gaming, including a $70 digital deluxe edition, which includes a plethora of editions. But, with that said, hopefully you've enjoyed the video. The normal stuff if you did, like, share, comment and subscribe. And I will see you soon. Take care of yourselves, have an amazing day. Bye for now.